Hello, and welcome to Senior Code Review Buddy. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to talk about how to write a technical doc, or tech doc, as I usually hear them called. In my last video, I talked about the value of a tech doc and why I think you'd want to write one. If you haven't seen that video yet, I'd strongly recommend checking it out first, as it'll help give the context about why we are writing this document and what questions we are trying to answer with it. You can find the link to that video in the description below. I've got a template for a tech doc that I've recently created that I'll walk through today. You can find a link to this template in the description below. Feel free to make a copy of it and use it for the next tech doc you work on. So first off, let's start with the very top of the document. We've got the document name, author, date, and status. For the name, try to pick something that's clear, unique, hopefully short. If the title is too long, people are either going to not refer to it or come up with some weird shortened form. Something like adding audio support to Fubar Communications seems okay to me. It's also possible that the name was already decided by other people ahead of time, so if that's the case, just keep that name. The author field is important because it ensures that people who find this doc know how to find the author if needed. If you put your tech doc in a searchable location, you might get unexpected people looking at it at some time in the future, so it can be helpful if they can know how to find you. You might also want to put the team that you're on in here too, in case when people find this document, you're maybe no longer on that team, or maybe not even within the company anymore. The date is straightforward. It's helpful so that people that find this maybe have a sense of when this was happening or is happening. And status is similar to date. It lets someone reading the doc quickly know, is this just an idea? It's a draft. Is this something that we're working on right now? Has this already been approved? Or was this rejected? Sort of what's the state of it? Because that could change how the level of urgency maybe they need in reading this document. All right, let's go a little further down. So now here we've got the table of contents. The table of contents shows sort of the high-level questions that this document should be answering. Problem statement, what's the problem? Summary solution, what's the elevator pitch for how we're going to solve this? Detailed solution, what's the proposed solution in enough detail for someone to implement it? Alternatives considered, why aren't we doing these other approaches? What were the pros and cons? Links to references isn't really a question, but I think it's still quite helpful to have here. And approvals. Who's signed off on this design? Who has seen it? Let's dig through each of these in turn now. So the problem summary can basically be thought of as the elevator pitch of the problem. Hopefully in just a few sentences, you can explain what the issue is and why it's important to solve it. It should be clear enough that someone else can read it and agree that, yep, this is something we should be tackling today. Don't worry about talking about the solution yet. This should just be the problem statement. If the problem is really complex and you think pages are required to understand the issue, I'd recommend making that a standalone document. You still should be able to have a short elevator pitch for it that you can write here, and then you can link to the more detailed document if people need to understand more about it. Broadly speaking, I think this is the one part of the document that should be relatively stable over time. It's unlikely that, based on other people reading it or you thinking about it, the problem's really going to change too much, but that is possible. So an example that I had picked for this document is this one here. Due to overall growth of the number of users, we are trying to write more data to the database than it's capable of processing at once. This is resulting in users hitting timeouts when they attempt to save their data, with the users getting frustrated and the data not getting saved. I think this does a nice job of quickly explaining what the problem is. So let's look at the solution summary next. So the solution summary is the elevator pitch of the solution. Similar to the problem summary, this should be relatively short. The details of your solution will be in the next section. This section should just contain enough information for someone to sort of understand the high level of your solution, but probably not enough detail for them to go and implement it. One small thing that I'd keep in mind here is you might have to update this section when you make updates to the detailed solution below. Just try to make sure that you keep the two of them in sync. So an example of a solution summary that I put here is, to improve throughput of the database, we'll stop using X, which can only run one instance at a time, and start using X2, which can scale up to as many instances as we need. This gives sort of just a quick understanding of, at a high level, what are we going to do, and we sort of talk about the difference here in one instance versus many. So at a quick glance, this is probably enough information for someone else to understand why we think this solution makes sense. Now let's go look at the detailed solution. Now it's the biggest section, the detailed solution. At a high level, I'd say you should put enough information here that someone else of your level, but without the knowledge you gained while writing this solution, should be able to implement this solution. So you could maybe think of writing this document with enough detail that you, from a couple of weeks ago, would be able to implement the solution fairly straightforward. Generally, I don't think you'll find code in this detailed section. Instead, it'll be descriptions of what approaches the code will take to solve the problem and what major challenges need to be considered and how they're going to be overcome. For example, if in your design you're going to involve a queue of jobs, you probably won't write out the code for handling the queues, but you probably want to explain the logic of how do you know which jobs are processed first in the queue. Is it first in, first out? Is it based on the sizes of the jobs? Based on the users? Based on a priority field? Stuff like that. If there are useful, related information pieces that you think can help, don't be afraid to add links in this section. Try and ensure that you do have some context around the links, that someone understands what they're there for, but I think it's fine to link out to other sources. You don't have to put everything in here. Now, there are 3 other sections that I've added here as well, because while I think they add a lot of value, they don't always, I think, get thought about. They are impacted code, testing, and monitoring and success. Impacted code, this is usually just links to the code that you expect to be modified in the course of this work. Depending on the size of this design, these could be links to functions, files, folders, or even repos. I'd say it's the least important of these 3, but I've personally always found it useful to just have a section here where I can quickly go from the tech doc into the code that we're expecting to be changed, or in the case where the tech doc has already been implemented, the code that has been changed. So next we've got testing. Testing is just sort of explaining how this solution is going to be tested. This is less about saying, and all of my code will have unit tests, and more about how are you going to ensure that the end-to-end flow of this solution is working. Is this testable via integration tests? Will it require a new manual test? And if so, is that manual test going to be added to your release process and run on every future release? So just think a little more about how you can make sure that once you've implemented this solution, that it keeps working the way you expect. And then the last part is monitoring and success. Now, these can mean very different things based on the type of problem being solved and what metrics, if any, you have access to. But at a high level, I think this section is very important because this is where you sort of describe how will someone know if what you have proposed a solution works or not. And if you don't have a way of sort of making it easy to write down to someone, here's how you can tell if this solution has been implemented correctly or not. Is it a problem that needs to be solved? Are you solving the right problem? By having the clearly defined sort of success metric here, it also makes it a lot easier for the reviewers to understand what you are aiming for. Because if you just say, we're trying to make the database more efficient, that can mean different things to different people. Are you talking about we want all of the queries to run faster? Are you talking about 95% runs faster, or just overall they're all faster? Or database more efficient, did you just mean storing less items in the database so it's cheaper? By really explaining what exactly you're going for, it can be easier to get alignment when reviewing and talking about this document. All right, I think that's enough about the detailed solution. Let's go to the alternatives considered. So, alternatives considered. It's unlikely that there was only one way to solve this problem, so that's what this section's for. Whatever other solutions you considered and then discarded, add them here. Add a brief description of what that solution was, what were the pros and cons to it, and why didn't you pick it? Make it very clear sort of what happened here. This is going to make it a lot easier for your reviewers, because as they go through the doc, they might think, oh, I wonder if we could use approach X instead. And if you don't have a section like this, even if you've already considered X and discarded it for good reasons, they don't know. So they'll probably put a comment there and say, hey, did you consider X? So by having this section, they can jump down to this section and see, oh, you did consider X. Oh, I hadn't thought about that con. Yeah, I guess it doesn't work. Or potentially, they read your reasons and they realize that you didn't actually list the biggest pro that they could think of. So that approach might be good because even though you did think of it, you maybe missed some part of it. So the alternatives considered can help the discussion go around and make sure you find the best solution. All right, let's go to references now. References is probably the odd bit. It is the strangest section. It doesn't quite, I think, maybe have as much weight as the others. Sometimes it'll be empty. Sometimes it'll have a lot of stuff. But basically, this is a section I think is useful to have just to link out to any resources you think would be useful for people. Try, just like I'd mentioned before in the detailed section, to provide some context around it, but just like a sentence or two. It doesn't have to be much. But this is just basically, if there's anything that pops up that you're like, I think this is useful to have, but there's no other spot here that makes sense for it, it maybe makes sense to go in the references. Just one section left now. An important part of the tech doc is getting alignment on the approach to be taken. The approvals section is just to record who's approved the solution. It's helpful to explicitly write down when someone has given approval to ensure that everyone is clear with each other on who gave approval at what point. It helps avoid a situation where someone thinks that they've given you approval because of how they phrase something, but you don't think they gave you approval yet, or the other way around, where they said something that you took as approval, but they didn't actually mean as approval yet. So just by having that sort of extra level of certainty, you can help make sure that when you do have everyone signed off on this doc, you have all really signed off on this doc. Helps avoid misunderstandings and disagreements that can happen if there's no alignment at this stage. Now that you've written up this great document, it's time to circulate it amongst your team and any folks you think might be impacted by it. Get approvals, and then start coding. Now, I know it usually won't be as simple as that. The review process can be tricky, so that seems like something I maybe should cover in a future video. Well, thanks for going through all of that with me today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing. Clear? Or I said something you don't agree with? Please leave a comment below. If you have any other comments, code you'd like me to review, or ideas you'd like me to talk about, you can reach me at chris@seniorcodereviewbuddy.com. Thanks. Have a great day.